Welcome everyone to the New Media Careers panel. I'm so excited to be moderating. My name is Michelle Sohn. I am class of 2011 and currently work at Global Partner Development for Amazon Web Services. Of course, I'm representing myself here, not the company today. It's my great pleasure to be moderating this panel along fabulous panelists, Kathy Choi and Jaimie Woo. Look, everybody, it's Friday night. We all have Zoom fatigue. So we're going to try to make this as engaging as possible. We're going to give you 3 ways to engage. You can go ahead and when Kathy and Jaimie say something that you just knocks your socks off and you want to ask a follow-up question, you go ahead and put a question in the chat. The second option is if you watch Deb Liu's keynote, Find Your Voice, you can write stack in the chat and I'll demonstrate here. If you write stack in the chat, S-T-A-C-K, I'll find an appropriate moment to bring you into the conversation. I'll call on you just like we're back at Duke, and you can take yourself off mute and directly ask the panelists your question. And the third option, we're definitely going to have a Q&A at around 8:40, 5:40 Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to wait until the live Q&A, you're welcome to do that. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to, and we'll do this in alphabetical order, to introduce Kathy Choi, Head of Partner Strategy and Operations at Snap. You may very well have the Snapchat app on your phone right at this moment. Prior to Snapchat, she was at the Boston Consulting Group and then the Bridgespan Group and started her career with Teach for America. She's a graduate of Harvard Business School and of course, Duke University. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And hello to everyone. I know it's always awkward to be in a group conversation over Zoom, but it's a pleasure to have all of you on.
Thanks, Kathy. Next, our next panelist is Jaimie Woo. I'm so pleased to be introducing her as well. She is a senior development producer at Culture Media House. She actually started her career as a community organizer on economic justice issues and then went to go work for a familiar name, then Vice President, now current President Joe Biden. She also was a communications director on The Hill and is, in all her free time, is a co-author of the New York Times bestselling book, Yes, She Can. She has a master's from University of Southern California and, as her background suggests, is also a proud graduate of Duke. Welcome, Jaimie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. This is so fun. So great to see everyone's faces.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into it. As I briefly mentioned, Kathy, we're going to start with you tonight. You're head of partner strategy and operations. I also work with partners, but I imagine it's a little different working with partners at a company like Snapchat. Could you describe what's your scope of responsibilities and give us a glimpse of what your day-to-day looks like?
Absolutely. So happy to. So I'm currently at Snapchat, so corporate name is Snap. And I think when you think across folks who have similar roles, the word partner is utilized in so many different ways. And so the way that it's used sort of in my context is it's really like a true partnership. So I work on all things related to our organic products and initiatives across Snap. So I don't touch revenue. That's really handled by folks within our sales org. And so I don't know if any of you are tech geeks and watched what happened yesterday, but we actually just launched our big keynote for the year called Snap Partner Summit. So that's where we unveil all of our sort of big announcements and the big partnerships that we've done throughout the year. So part of my world is I launched 7 partnerships yesterday with mostly brand partners. So these are household names that you might know that we've engaged in to use some of our experimental technology, especially as it relates to augmented reality. So one of the biggest partnerships I launched yesterday was with the Lego Group. So you all might know them from when you were a child or have children yourself, as I do. And the work that I do is really engaging Lego as a partner to figure out, hey, you really care about stuff like creativity and innovation. We're coming up with this new technology that allows you to share augmented reality experiences with your friends. Can we build something amazing together? So that's really the scope of my world. It's really thinking about where is a meaningful value exchange across our organic products and services and do it in a way that introduces this early technology to the market.
Very cool. And I'm going to ask my next question to Jaimie, but really quick, you mentioned organic partnerships, organic brands. Could you briefly tell us what that means? Because the
Yep.
only organic I know is in the grocery store.
Of course. Organic in my world means they don't pay. So any of the partners that I work for right now, they are not paying for access to our early technology. So everything that is actually exchanged with some sort of price or revenue share, that is done through our sales organization. I only touch the stuff that is either free by design or so new that we don't have any pricing for it yet. So that's what organic means for me.
Oh, Michelle, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I got too excited to ask my next question. Thank you for letting me know. Jaimie, this one's for you. As we introduced you, you're a senior development producer for Culture Media House. Similar to Kathy, I feel like I see a lot of titles during the title credits of movies and shows. So what does a senior development producer do? And what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so it's so funny because the word development means different things in different contexts. So having come from politics in the world of community organizing and political advocacy, development always meant fundraising, right? So like, oh, you're fundraising, you're building partnerships, et cetera. But in Hollywood and in the entertainment sector, development really it's more creative development. So a lot of my work really surrounds ideation, basically creating the bedrock and foundations for what a potential television show or film or docuseries, documentary will look like. So in terms of my day-to-day, I work on a lot of pitch documents. Culture House Media is a POC and women-led television and film premium production company. So we are putting together essentially projects that we could essentially sell to networks or major studios to then, appear on television, whether it's Netflix, like a streaming service, or ABC, like a network, TV service, broadcast channel. So my work essentially is putting together like a log line of like, what is this show about? Putting together the concept of the show, the format. Is it a 45-minute docuseries? Is it a reality show? Is it scripted? Do we have a host? What's the actual format? And then going into all the different elements that make up of a show. What does the cast look like? What's the tone? What story were we trying to tell? Why is it relevant now? And why are we targeting this particular network or this particular studio, right? Because and HBO has a completely different feel and a different tone and a different, they're looking for different parameters compared to NBC, right? So a lot of that is a lot of ideation, and then partnering with writers, with other producers, other creatives on putting that content together. And there's a lot of steps in the development process, whether it's putting together a pitch deck or putting together a sizzle reel, or essentially kind of like a trailer for what the show will look like. So today was finalizing, giving edits and notes on a sizzle reel that an editor sent to me that we're pitching to a major streaming platform, et cetera. So it's super fun. It's a lot of ideation, but it's a lot of collaboration across different departments with folks all across the industry. And, the work that I do really is directly tied to a greater mission, which is really to elevate the stories and voices of historically excluded communities and underrepresented communities. And so we're really focusing on Black and Brown voices, on queer voices, on, things that kind of disrupt the default narrative that we've seen in media today. So that's kind of where what I do, and a little bit about Culture House.
Very cool. And you also mentioned a term that was intriguing, sizzle reel. What is a sizzle reel?
Yeah, so a sizzle reel is essentially, it's kind of like a proof of concept video, right? So instead of filming an entire 30-minute episode of something, which can cost a lot of money, and when we sign development deals with networks or studios, they they don't want to invest so much money for us to, kind of put something together. We'll put together just like a 3-minute, what we call sizzle reel, which is essentially like, it gives you the tone, the idea, like the major players, the format, kind of like puts what you would create in a pitch document into a visual format. So yeah, great question though.
Thanks, Jaimie. Maybe I'll consider making a sizzle reel instead of submitting a resume at some point.
Yeah, how fun.
Very cool. Kathy, let's head back to you. As I mentioned in your background, you started your career in Teach for America, so education, and then made your way to the Bridgespan Group and Boston Consulting Group, and then switched over to Snapchat, a major technology company. Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to make the move into technology and media, and what advice would you give to folks who are trying to make a similar journey and a similar pivot in their career?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at my resume on paper, there's nothing about it that reads like something that would resonate in a consumer tech company that does work like AR. So I think for me, there's, if you are considering a pivot or, trying to do something new, like you can use me as sort of a mental model for how you would do that. I think for me specifically, my entry point going into Snap was not because I'm some sort of consumer technology expert, because I'm not. It's actually more of a functional one. So I think when you generally, think about making a change in your career, you can change function, you can change industry. And for me, because of the experience I had working at BCG and working on a lot of strategy projects, that was really the background that caught the eye of the recruiter who was actually recruiting for a role. So previous to being on the partnerships team, I actually reported directly to our chief strategy officer and worked on strategic initiatives. So what they actually wanted specifically was sort of my horsepower related to strategy, because they have a slew of people that are coming in with like more of a traditional tech background or a brand background, et cetera. And it was actually seen as sort of a benefit to come in with a little bit of a different, definitely more business oriented background. So I think whenever you look at a role, one question to ask yourself within either media entertainment broadly or even consumer tech is, what do you want to do? And is the thing that you're optimizing for some sort of like functional specialty that you can translate across different industries? Or is it actually something that you're function agnostic and care much more about just like being in that specific space or context? So for me, I actually cared very little about the industry and really wanted to find something that was more attuned to the function, and of course, other factors like culture and so forth.
Very cool. And I feel that strategy is also very broad, a broad term. So have you found that business strategy and strategy as it applies to Snap is different than what you expected, or is it pretty similar?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm just like the queen of nebulous, vague terms today. But I think if you actually look in Webster's dictionary what the definition of strategy is, it's something along the lines of like having a plan for the long term. It's actually very simple. And so what that looks like, of course, depends on the context that you're in. And even people who are director of strategy or strategy manager roles, like depending on the company that you're in, it can mean a lot of different things. So this is something that is a little bit company specific. So whenever you all are interested in a role like this, like digging into the details of what the day-to-day looks like is going to be really important. For me, it's actually very different right now, because the main difference is I'm doing strategy right now within the context of like being in-house in a company versus being in client services. So when I was at the Boston Consulting Group, I did strategy work for insurance companies and banks and commercial real estate firms, but you're always coming in as like a third party that's serving the needs of your client. So you're never part or embedded within a company itself. So the work is always kind of an outside-in view, and you're coming in for a project. What's different about what I do now, even though I'm part of the strategy, is I'm actually writing a plan right now for my team that's actually going to guide like what we do and what we resource over the next 2 years. So I am fully embedded, and also I'm dictating sort of the path and the future of my team. So I'm not coming in as a third party, this is my basically roadmap for the next few. So you have a little bit more skin in the game, and it impacts sort of like what you want to do and how you want to build your team and that kind of thing. So that's, I would say, the major difference.
Awesome. Jaimie, sort of similarly tapping into what you mentioned about your background, going from community organizing and politics and then into media. I'm very interested. What inspired you to make that shift? And are there major differences that you didn't expect, or is it, in a way, is a lot of politics just theater?
I mean, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, there's a reason why. Sorry, say it again, Kathy.
I was saying Michelle is definitely teeing that up.
Yeah. Waiting to say that. No, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a reason why there is a lot of exchange between politics between DC and LA, right? I actually, would comment and would joke around that they're very similar in that they're very egocentric. They're very based on who you know and your network. And they're very much based on starting out working really, really hard for no pay. Like you think about a lot of the creatives who are just hustling and trying to get their work out there, trying to get an agent, et cetera. And in politics, I mean, all those internships are unpaid, right? So, in terms of making that transition, it's definitely not something I ever thought I would do. At Duke, I was really involved in like social justice initiatives, in community organizing. I worked at the Duke Women's Center, was involved with the Center for Race Relations. So I saw my path going towards that nonprofit kind of political organizing field. And after the Obama administration and after working on Capitol Hill for a couple of years, I had come out with this book called Yes, She Can, which is I co-authored with 9 other women who worked at the White House with me, all in our 20s. And we did this kind of book tour and spoke to elementary students, middle school students, all the way to college students. And we found that just no one knew we existed, right? Like no one had any idea that someone who looked like me worked in the White House for President Obama and Vice President Biden. And because that narrative was always like, oh, it's just a bunch of old white men, or it's like the West Wing, right? Where it's like, you have President Bartlett and his like 6 male white advisors and Allison Janney on the side, it's like, and so for us, it was just shocking that even some young girls were like, oh, I can do that, right? Because also the narrative about politics was always about running for office. And, yes, we need women and we need AAPI people to run for office, but all those people require a staff, right? They require teams of people, and those jobs are still available and can really, shift the needle on change. And so that book really inspired me to really investigate and explore other creative platforms that can help elevate those types of stories, right? And television and film have an amazingly powerful influence on how we see people, how we interact with people, what we think of stereotypes of stories, of who's valued, et cetera. And so this was 2 years into Trump's administration, and I was kind of itching for a way to get out of DC. I was like, what, I'm getting a little jaded from this place. And so, yeah, I moved to LA and really started hustling. And that was kind of that transition point of, politics is so personal. And I think that entertainment, while, can feel a little shallow at times in terms of maybe people's aspirations, there is also really, really an amazing opportunity for good and for social impact and for diversifying representation, as which I know, this panel is also about. So that's kind of that story in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jaimie. And I'm struck by this phrase, no one knew we existed. And the title of the panel, part of the title of the panel is representation. Let's stick with you for a second, Jaimie, and then Kathy, I want to ask you a similar question. What does representation mean to you? And what challenges have you faced, or even stereotypes, if any, have you faced in your career, and how have you managed those types of situations? And Kathy, I'm going to ask you a similar question to weigh in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, representation. I think there's a lot of different meanings there. I mean, in the first place, representation is a visual cue, right? Is just seeing people that look like you or seeing people from all different backgrounds. When I was a communications director for Congressman Lloyd Doggett, he represents parts of Austin and San Antonio. I was the only female API communications director in all 435 offices of the US Congress, right? So this is like every senator and every US House of representative, congressperson. And when I left, there was zero. It's just like, of course, young Asian women aren't going to consider communications when they don't see people that look like me or that look like them in levels of power. So I think representation is partially a visual cue, is partially just seeing people, right, in those positions of power. But I also think really embedded in that is an element of inclusion. And I define inclusion as shared power, as feeling respected and valued in the place. So I don't want to be there as a token. I don't want to be there just so you can check the box and say, okay, I have an Asian woman here now, so I can check the box. I don't want our writer's room to just put in a Black person so we can say we have a Black person. No, I want to bring in that person because I actually value their experience and their perspective and their identity that disrupts the default and the kind of cultural narrative that we've kind of lived throughout our whole lives, right? So I think a part of representation is meaningful inclusion and meaningful a sense of belonging, where we're not just doing the visual cue, right? There needs to be some meaning behind that visual cue and actual action embedded in it. So, and then, I mean, to your second question about things that I felt, I mean, it's so funny. I think, most of us can probably agree that there is definitely a stereotype associated with Asian women as being really reserved or shy or docile, et cetera. And I'm very outspoken. I'm very kind of, stick to my guns, could even call me confrontational. And I think that really surprises people. And in some ways can be a double-edged sword because I'm not really reinforcing the stereotype that they expect. And so there's also some tension there of like, oh, okay, this is not what I expected. But that's always been a challenge. I think, both in DC and in LA, choosing two industries, politics and entertainment, where, we're few and far between. I have to start and really create that space and kind of demand that space in these traditionally white male spaces. And there's a joke here that I feel like I know all the Asian people in Hollywood because we just kind of all find each other because there's not that many of us, and so anyways, that's probably one element of that. But I would love to hear from Kathy too. I'm sure you have such an interesting insight into this in the tech world.
Lots of thoughts here. I think one of the things that resonates on the seeing it visually is, I don't know if you all saw this new article that just came out today that said that there was a study actually of how many AAPI roles in Hollywood there have been over the last, I think 10 or 15 years. And they did a survey, and this survey studies basically showed that 1/3 of them were actually taken by The Rock. That is basically
1/3 of all.
1/3 of all AAPI roles. And I think that is, I say it with a little bit of humor, but I think just a little bit of an example of just how limiting that level of representation is, especially in Hollywood and what you're sort of seeing portrayed forward as media. If you all are Netflix junkies like I am, if you've seen, it's really a teenage rom-com, but All the Boys I've Loved Before and some of these other new films that have come out where actually the protagonist is someone of Asian descent, and just how just sort of startling it is in some ways because you're so not used to it, and it reminds you of just how rare that is. And how we need to push for more of that go forward. I was going to take a little bit of a different tack and talk about sort of what representation means in the corporate context, especially in the world I come from. I think, one of the things I think a lot about right now, and was probably, definitely relevant today, and certainly was really relevant when I was at BCG, is this notion of the bamboo ceiling. And so the thing that I've noticed also in the state of my career, I think, how many years am I out? I'm 12 years out of undergrad at this point. The whittling down of Asian faces as you go up the level of seniority is something I've noticed a lot. And so, coming from a place like Duke, I actually had tons of peers that looked like me. It wasn't unusual to be seen at, elite institutions as part of like an analyst class at a Wall Street bank or consulting firm, et cetera, or even, going to really amazing professional institutions and graduate institutions. But as I'm getting more senior in my career, I look up, and when I looked at the partners at my firm when I was at BCG, or right now, even looking at the C-suite at Snap, there's just a huge lack of just AAPI representation. And so the question is always sort of why? Because this is not a pipeline issue, because that pipeline is going strong. And if you look at graduation rates and even like in junior roles, sort of what AIPI folks are doing, they're disproportionately filling the seats compared to the percentage of population. But something is happening that's really real. So I've done a little bit of research on this, and there's actually like a great professor named Jackson Liu out of MIT Sloan School of Business that does a lot of research on this topic in general. And there are certain factors that matter when it comes to promotion, especially senior roles, and particularly even more so than South Asians, East Asians having this perception of being a cultural mismatch because of a lack of confidence or assertiveness specifically. So that's something that's been really top of mind for me. And when it comes to representation, I hope that, with more resources and research being put into the issue, and, more outspoken folks like myself and Jaimie, making our way up the career ladder, that will change. But I would love to see that representation issue just tackled more head on, because especially in the corporate world, it's not like Hollywood where it's an actual dearth of people who are kind of in the pipeline. There's actually a ton of people that are coming in. So why isn't it materializing into some real results, especially at this point in 2021?
There's so much to unpack there. So on the upside, I want to talk a little bit about advice that you would give folks who are interested in, Jaimie, like you, media entertainment, going to the film, the TV show route, or Kathy, you, corporate and then strategy at a top tech company. What advice would you give to folks who are interested in not only the industry, but leadership roles? What advice would you give to folks who are really aspiring to that? And Kathy, why don't we start with you this time?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's the fact that by default, I have never had a mentor that's looked like me. The majority of my mentors throughout my career have been men. And I think all but like one of them actually have been AAPI. So like that, those are just the sort of cards I was dealt with, because like in the worlds that I've occupied, there just aren't that many people like me that are senior enough that I could sort of look up to. So my advice would be like, take what you can get and utilize people who may not actually reflect who you are, from a phenotype perspective, but still are really, really passionate about making sure there's more diversity happening at the senior levels. And of course, invested in you personally as a person. I think that's really, really important, that we don't just like put things away to the side just because they might not be perfect. I think that's really, really key. And then I think secondly would just be like to be really bold and be unafraid to take some risks. So I think many of us may come from backgrounds where there was very few established paths of what was acceptable and was seen as even like comprehensible to like our parents, right? So like my parents, like, I don't think they understand what I do at all. I don't think they really understood any of this. They just know that like, I have, a couple degrees now from fancy places, and that kind of checks a couple boxes for them. But my mom and my dad cannot like wrap their head around like what the heck I do in my day to day. And I say be bold because like, don't let sort of like what you've been brought up to see as the only options are, or even the fact that there aren't any folks in leadership roles and places that you're interested in, be the thing that detracts you from pursuing an opportunity there. And think of yourself as a trailblazer, and just like take risks and jobs and roles that might not be, you know, sometimes perfect, but if there's something interesting there that's calling you back to it, don't be afraid to take a risk. I think there's probably folks here from different levels of seniority in different parts of your career. And if there are any of you who've been working for more than 10 years, you know that life doesn't always pan out the way you expect, and your career doesn't transpire the way you expect. And so sometimes being risky and taking these sort of bold risks can play out in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, +1 to everything Kathy said. I totally resonate with that. I think too, something that I've discovered in making this transition from politics to entertainment is I moved to LA thinking it was just made up of like directors, writers, and actors. I was like, that's it. That's what makes a film. And there's so much that goes into creating these stories from the business side, finance side, from post-production, like editors and gaffer, you know, all these different terminology and from the production side to casting. I mean, so I think, like, to Kathy's point, it really is exploring what's out there and not limiting yourself to what you've heard or what you've seen in pop culture and media as like, this is the only paths that are available. There are so many. And I think it's just talking to a lot of different types of people and hearing about their day-to-day and hearing about, you know, the impacts that they make on their particular field. So that's one. I think also I was really timid moving to Hollywood, not having had a film or television background. I continuously kind of second guessed myself, like, oh, you know, I didn't go to film school. I didn't do these internships. I wasted all this time, not wasted, but I, you know, like spend all this time in a completely different industry. So how am I going to catch up? And I think like, I would go back and tell that young woman 3 years ago that like what your experience was really, really makes you different and makes you who you are and actually makes you super valuable. And so I would also not only emphasize, you know, your different backgrounds, but also your different cultural backgrounds too. Like, I think so much so this industry has relied on what we call the default, right? The just historically like white male perspective. And now I'm like really leaning heavily into the fact that I'm Chinese. Like, that's okay. And I can do that. And because I think, you know, for a long time, I've really not done that. I've actually really leaned against it because I thought that would be the more successful way to go about it. But now it's like coming to terms with my own cultural identity, my own experiences, and how I move in the world, how I show up in the world, you know, really, really live in that and be proud of that, because that is really what's going to set you apart from anybody else. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. I think like be bold, like Kathy mentioned. And the thing about new media and media is that it's constantly changing. And so as much as you can gain skills and as they're constantly changing, you'll be relevant, right? Just consistently be learning and moving forward and in that trajectory.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think, I don't know if you would agree with me, Jaimie, just from even like an outside in perspective, I feel like this is a golden age actually for representation in Asian media and Asians in media. And there's been no better time in some ways to like try to get into this field. So I have actually a colleague who was a consultant with me at BCG who just like quit her job and is like actually trying to become an actress. And is actually doing very, very well in roles that like even 10 years ago, I don't think would have even existed. I was like flipping through, I watched The Resident, I don't know if the medical drama fans in the audience, and yesterday, you know, the hunky Manish Dayal, and, you know, he's of course, and, you know, he plays an Indian doctor on the show, and there are scenes that represent, you know, a failed marriage he had where they actually even show parts of his wedding. And it just occurred to me, like, this literally would not have happened. Can you imagine ER doing this 10 years ago? It just like wouldn't even be an option. So I just think there's so many ways between this, you know, if you all are familiar with Gold House and the efforts that are happening around like accelerating different Asian-owned businesses, venture capitalist money's flowing in. There's a ton of investment happening across culture, entrepreneurs, et cetera. So as much as there's also a lot of frustrating things happening in the world, of course, with all of the Asian hate crimes, in a weird duality kind of way, I feel like it's actually an opportune time to come in this world. There's just a lot going on in a good way.
Yeah.
Well, Kathy and Jaimie, thank you so much. I think it's never been a better time to have this symposium, and thank you so much for donating your time and wisdom to the panel. I'll turn it over to the audience for some live Q&A. You can go ahead and put your questions in the chat, or if you'd like to just speak directly to the panelists, let me know. But we actually had somebody submit a question beforehand, so we'll start with that one. What is the process for getting a job in new media? And I'll let both Kathy and Jaimie weigh in. Kathy, do you want to go first on this one? What's the process to get a job at a place like Snapchat?
Oh man, well, I can only speak for Snapchat. I can't speak for the different worlds that are out there. I mean, I think it depends a little bit on like what you want to do, but for the most part, like we are a big enough company now where we just run like a smooth, well-oiled engine, right? There's a job board. You can like reach out to different teams depending on what your relevant interests are. We have an internship program, so there's just so many different inroads. If there's any of you that are like personally interested in roles at Snap and you see something on our job board that's interesting, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with any of the folks on this group. But unfortunately, there's no magic formula in this one. There's no like finagling, magic networking that needs to happen. It's pretty straightforward. You submit your resume and then we go from there.
Nice. Jaimie, what about your industry? What's the best way to get a job in media?
I think one way to be equipped is to really have a good pulse on what you want to do. I think I moved out here really I have no idea. I actually thought I wanted to be a screenwriter, like television writer. And I took a screenwriting class and I talked to a bunch of writers, and then I realized I don't want to do that. So that was important. It was like a really big turning moment. I was like, oh no, I moved here for this reason. And now I actually don't want to do this, but really figure out the particular area that you want to be in, and whether that's in tech, whether that's in entertainment, what's the subfield, and then the subfield of that subfield. And if you don't know, like ask a bunch of questions, meet with a ton of different people to give you that insight. Because when you're applying for these roles, you want to be specific. And I think people are looking for specificity, not just, I want to get in, I want to be in TV. Like that's not good enough. Like you need to have a particular vision. And I think at least in my field, you need to have a particular perspective and taste, right? When people ask you, what are your favorite shows? Who are your favorite directors? What are your favorite formats? Like you got to have answers to those, and you have to explain why. Like, why is, Mare of Easton your new favorite show? Or why is so-and-so, your favorite director? Because what we value is perspective and experience. And I don't mean experience in the field, I mean life experience, right? Like what is unique about you that you can bring to the table that's not just the same old we've seen. In some ways, I actually think going the traditional route of like, go to film school, do a bunch of internships, et cetera, XYZ is actually it's not going to be as strong anymore compared to people who are coming from different industries or approaching it in new and fresh ways. So yeah, I think that goes along the lines with the advice that I'd given earlier. Michelle, you're muted.
What's interesting, sorry, I have to double click it. What's interesting is I'm sensing a theme, right, between Jaimie, your advice, and then Kathy, your own path. It seems that there's not a particular, forgive the pun, script to follow when it comes to these types of jobs. So Kathy, for example, you said that your background in strategy was actually really interesting to a tech company. And so I wanted to get a little bit more tactical with some of the advice you've given. So for example, Kathy, you said to find mentors. What tactically, like, what did you do to find a mentor? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, there's all sorts of different pieces of advice on this topic specifically. If any of you have read like Adam Grant, he's got like a whole great piece on this. I think so number one, people like have this like weird conception of mentor as like this like much senior person who's like, you know, on call to like help you whenever you have an issue, et cetera. But the reality is that it doesn't work that way. So here's what I mean by that. One is, no matter, I think, how senior someone is, there has to be some sort of value exchange. So that means whether it is you helping them with something really minor, you know, hey, they've got a college age son who wants to like, you know, learn about the company you're currently at, et cetera, make an introduction. There's always something that you can actually provide some value to your mentor. So I just want to just encourage us to think about it as not a unidimensional thing, but it's actually like, it's a relationship, like any other relationship you have with friends or family. You have to nurture it. So I think what that means is, one, you should make sure that it's not always you asking for something, but sometimes like saying like, hey, is there anything going on in your world where like I can be helpful, right? So one of my favorite mentors is actually from my days when I was in DC working in education. I don't touch that world anymore, but I'm still in his Rolodex. I still get information from like, you know, some marathon he's running to raise money for cancer. And I always donate every single year just to have it as excuse to like reach out and say hello and just like have that connection. So I think that's really important. And then the second tactical thing is like, a mentor doesn't need to be someone that's like, so like, you don't need it to be all like C-suite members of a company. My mentors are covering different parts of my life too. And Adam Grant's whole thing is getting advice from people is in some ways one of the stupidest things you can do, because they're answering questions about your life and decisions you have to make without actually having any context into what it's like to be you, right? They're answering from their point of view. So I say that because I think it's actually important to have an assembly of people that cover different parts of your life and also different phases. So I have, for example, a group of women I used to work with that were all like 4 to 5 years older than I was. And so I'm a mom of a toddler. So they're actually a great group to reach out to whenever I ask about the struggles of being a working mom and like how to navigate that. So they mentor me on like what to expect in that 4 to 5 year time frame. I have your typical like uber senior, like former female managing director of Bain Capital from when I was at Harvard Business School. She's like a classic mentor. So I have that. But then I also have like my friends who are my age, who are in a similar role in a totally different company or industry. And they're also incredible mentors for like navigating conversations with their team, navigating issues that they're having with, you know, different other stakeholders in their lives. So think broadly about mentors and add value any way you can in that relationship. Those would be my 2 pieces of tactical advice.
Awesome. This is going to be the last question. We did have another audience member ask the question. Jaimie, we'll start with you, and then Kathy, you'll have the chance to have the last word here. I feel like I'm running a presidential debate. Do you have days when you think I would have been better off staying in DC, or in your case, Kathy, BCG? And how do you not go down that rabbit hole? So Jaimie, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question, because I was re-prompted with this question when Biden was running for office. It was, are you going to go back if he should win? You know, you still have like, you know, your context there, et cetera. And for me, and this really factored into my decision to move to LA, my thought was DC will always be there. That world of politics, the work that needs to be done on gender violence prevention work will still be there, most likely, you know, unless, you know, some miracle comes about that gender violence is completely eradicated in the next few years. But my thought was, it's always going to be there. So if at any point that I don't feel like I'm still growing and learning here and building upon my kind of repertoire, I can always go back. Because the thing is, what I've done in DC will always be on my resume. Me having worked at the White House, having worked at on Capitol Hill as a comms director, will always be there. Even if it's many years removed, the fact that it's still there still means that I have value there. And so kind of that reassurance of like, it'll always be there, all that stuff is still on your resume, gave me the reassurance and kind of like, I guess, courage to come out to LA and just really kind of go for it, right? And really enter a new industry without looking back. And so, yeah, I mean, like there are some days where I wonder, like, what would my life be like there? But I also am so grateful for all the new experiences and relationships that I've garnered here. And I had never lived on the West Coast. So for me, it's like, it's just so fun and exciting, right? And being that kind of still kind of mid-career, early stage of my career, trying to build out what that looks like. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And I don't think I have any regrets in that regard.
To sort of add on to that, I mean, so a couple thoughts here. One is, I actually think that there are meaningful benefits for staying in one institution that should not be discounted. So one of my best friends in the whole world, she's from New York. She went to Columbia. She started her corporate career at Goldman Sachs, and she is now a managing director, and she's crushing it. And you could not drag this woman out of New York if you tried. So there are huge upsides for like staying committed to something and avoiding also some of the switching costs, I think, of doing something else. With that said, you always have to think about making a choice about a career, I think, in a way that's not one-dimensional. So when I graduated from Duke, so I graduated the year after the Great Recession. It was not a great job market. And I think there was just like a huge singular focus amongst my class around like a job, right? Like that's like the defining thing that you have to do and get. And it is the most important thing that defines you as a person even. And I think the thing that's changed for me, especially in the recent years, is when I make choices now, it is way more than just about the job. So whether or not I take this job and go to Snap or take this other job or stay at BCG, it's a decision that's a balance between like my professional interests and what I want to do. But it's also like, how does this impact my family? What sort of balance do I want to have in my life? Do I want to make time for myself outside of my job and not be in client services anymore so I can actually have hobbies and see friends and do all these things I can't do? And also factors you might not be able to control. So I think one of the overlooked things is intersection of course, diversity when it comes to race with class. You know, I support my parents financially. There are other things like student debt, for example, that might influence your decision. So I only say that because I think there are certainly benefits to sometimes staying. And I don't want this to be an exercise, and it's always better to go and grab that shiny object. But I do want to remind you, especially for some of you who are a little younger in your career, that it becomes way more than about the job. It's about your choices in life. And, you know, I'm also lucky that I have support to be able to work. And for a lot of people, because of family or money or other issues, they don't even have the option to be in the workplace. Or sometimes you might say like, I'm tired, I don't want to work anymore. That's cool too. So I think it's a real personal decision at the end of the day.
Great. Good. Well, Kathy and Jaimie, thanks so much for your time. Thanks to the audience. Let's close this way. I'm going to hand it over to the Duke Asian Alumni Association board member in the audience today to close. And as we do that, if you could just put in this chat, based on what you heard today, how can we better support Asian alumni or just Duke alumni in general? One takeaway from the session. And Meng, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Meng. Actually, the speech is pretty inspiring. The way my career path is kind of like all the way. Like I would study financial mathematics in NC State, and then went to Duke, get my like electronic computer engineering degree, and then I worked in the IT company as a software engineer for 5 years, and now I switched back to the UI UX design, which is in more of a design world. So it's like finally try like get to the path where I love. Like I kind of like make painting and drawing stuff like for 20 years and coding for 2 years. So I decided like coding is not gonna be my final choice. So stick to the career path. Thanks again for being here. Be well and be forever Duke.